last. We always say where we're from. We've just started. Welcome, everybody, to another DoneJS contributors meeting. One in the middle of summer, so nobody is here. I am your host with the most, Justin Meyer. Can everybody go through and say hello and where you're from and any shout outs you want to quickly make?
Cool. Hi, I'm Chris. Shout out to my dog. He's like over there. He doesn't care. But yeah, I'm in Erie.
What's her name?
Hmm?
What's your dog's name?
Oh, his name's Comet.
Nice.
I'm surprised you didn't know that. He has a Twitter account.
I think I knew that. I just
Yeah.
forgot.
All right.
Hey, Comet.
Hey, I'm Kevin. I'm outside of Chicago, and today is my son's first birthday. So that's pretty exciting.
Right. Yeah,
Dang it,
happy
Kevin, you
birthday.
beat me. That was a way cooler fact.
I only get it once, though, so you can use your dog next week.
Oh, hey, I'm Mike. I'm just outside of Austin, Texas in Dripping Springs. And last Saturday it was 107 degrees here.
Whoa. Does that make you miss the Midwest, or not enough?
No, because I was the week before the Saturday I was back in Chicago, and while it was beautiful, it was really humid. So there is something to the dry heat, but 107 is pretty extreme.
It's like cold here now.
Yeah. Now it's like 85 and it feels a little bit chilly. I need a hoodie.
Cool. I'm actually going to Wisconsin Dells next week.
Hopefully it warms up.
Well, it's the Kalahari, so it's all indoor.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. All right, so let's just do statuses. I've been working on this big streaming presentation. It's really been with Matthew, who's not here because he's working on it right now. It's been phenomenal, actually, to kind of vicariously work through with Matthew on this, where he's doing most of the work. I'm just putting slides together and kind of overseeing. It's the Wild West right now. There's just no good information out there. Trying to create, we're trying to do a lot of performance tests and see like when you should do one strategy, when you should do another, and it's just learning a whole lot of things, or not even learning. It's like, what's that? There's like, I don't know, a Buddhist or some kind of metaphor where like you're just touching some part of the elephant and you have no idea what's out there. We're finding, just there's strange network things that I had no idea about. There's strange database performance things that I have no idea about. There's just behaviors that you would like, things that you think would work a certain way, and they don't. So it's been fun and frustrating to see this world that I've never really been exposed to too much before. So next week I'm going to give it, and then I'm going to work on, there's another blog article that I've been wanting to do forever. So that's going to be it for me that I've done this week and next week. Chris, you want to go next?
Yeah, this week I don't think I accomplished too much. I got can-utils tests running on Node. And I made some stupid mistakes, made some stupid assumptions that Kevin helped me out with. And just some more CanJS issues, nothing really exciting.
So Steel QUnit works on, QUnit works on Node now.
Yep, they have a nice tap reporter, very cool.
Awesome.
And a lot more reliable than what we were going to use. That Mocha QUnit UI shim. So I'm a lot more happy with that solution for testing.
Yeah. Awesome. Kevin?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen. So yeah, this week I finished up the bulk of the new can-stage binding syntax. So this will probably be published next week, and we'll update the site next week. But this is kind of a preview of what it's going to look like. So you can see all of the new bindings for event bindings you can use on, and then for one-way bindings we've got from and to, and then bind for two-way bindings. It's much easier to remember compared to the old syntax, which is now down here in this legacy bindings. It still exists, but it's kind of relegated to this legacy section for now. A couple other nice things, you can use camel case names for your properties and your events, which is awesome. You don't have to do that translation in your head to kebab case things. And then there's a few other things we still want to add to make it so you can explicitly bind to view models or elements, and some other stuff like that. But yeah, this will probably launch next week. And let me figure out how to stop sharing my screen. Sorry, go ahead.
Keep sharing it, because there's
okay.
What is how do you remember these new bindings? What's the?
Yeah, so we have for the different one-way bindings, we have these kind of sections called that down here of how to read this. So this is basically, if you want to read this, it's basically saying you can read this as set child prop from value, and then for 2, it's send child prop to value. So that's kind of how you can remember which way this is going for from and to.
So from is basically taking from the scope and setting it as either a property on the element or a value on the view model.
Right. If your element has a view model, like in this case, it will set it on the view model. If it does not have a view model, like it's a regular element, you haven't added a view model, then it'll set an attribute or a property on the element. And
then 2 does the opposite. It'll take it like from the component or from like an inputs value, and then set that the scope value.
Mm-hmm. It'll send it to the scope.
Cool, awesome. And then bind does two-way binding.
Yep, exactly.
Beautiful. The other thing you were
That's
mentioning was about how it's able to handle camel case and dashes. And I just wanted to provide a little bit of clarity. So previously, you could actually write camel case, and then what we would do is convert that to dashes for you. The problem, though, was that if you wrote dashes, like if you wanted an event name like, food dash bar or something like that, or my dash custom event, you could never actually bind on that with CanJS's bindings, because it would assume what you really wanted is a camel case event name. Now with these, what you see is what you get, right?
Right. Yep.
So if you wrote camel case, it's going to look for a camel binder on a camel case. If you wrote a dash, it's going to bind on a dash event name.
Yep.
Which is good. Cool. I'm excited for those.
Yeah, so that's what I spent the most of the week on, and then helping other people with issues that are going to be in 391. So next week we'll probably look to publish CAN 391 early in the week, and then this new CAN stash bindings release right after that, and then CAN 3.10 later in the week. That should have all of this, hopefully.
Awesome. Mike, anything you want to talk about?
No, mostly lurking. The most recent thing I worked on was the CAN slots at the last retreat. But I just came to be part of the team basically, and hear the good stuff. That new camel case hyphen stuff would be helpful for me. That's been confusing, and being able to read more directly like English for the other things is really cool too. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm constantly amazed that we didn't think of that earlier. Like, I don't know if you were around, Mike, but when we've got this is like our 4th binding syntax, and we did a big, I came up with some, and then we kind of opened it up, and there were 13,000 suggestions from everybody in the community in Bitovi, and then we all voted on which ones we thought, and the ones that we previously had were the ones that people kind of won by committee, and then which nobody was ever really satisfied with. But it was Angular. It was kind of very similar to what Angular 2 was doing, so it was a lot inspired by that. And then I'm just I don't know why we didn't just think to do it this way from.
Yeah, somebody pretty early on taught me to read it the way that it's now basically written, like a mental trick to read it that way, and yeah, it just now matches up with what's already in the head.
I think what helped me actually is when I was writing up the CanStash bindings presentation, the training presentation that I made, I created this grid, and I don't know, I just like, there was like arrows and things like that, and maybe that's what helped me. You know, I often say the best way to, you know, I'm really a big believer in documentation driven APIs. Like if you have to write something up and explain it to someone, and you'll mentally start going through the process of like, how are they going to come to understand it? You'll often realize whether you'll find improvements very quickly for what you think is good APIs or not. Right. And then the other thing is just user experience. I think like we just do these DoneJS contributor meetings, and then we'll see someone who's been to like 4 of them, and then we'll just be like, what is the binding syntax means? And it's just like, okay, we've got to fix this somehow.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I like.
Cool. Awesome. So topics. Chris, do you want to go through Raj? Show some comments from that.
Yeah, okay. But before I do that, I mean, there is one topic that I just posted just now. Just so everyone knows it exists, we are looking at how we can improve the debugging experience for CanJS. So if you have any ideas or feedback, we've already done this internally at Petovi, looking at what problems we wanted to solve. If there's anything in this issue that should be there but isn't, please leave a comment or get in touch with us. We will be looking at that for at least the next 2 weeks, probably, how we can improve the development experience. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just to give me a break to set up. So, yeah, I can do a quick presentation about Raj. My goal with this presentation is to just kind of give like a sampling of kind of my mindset about certain things. Because if you're coming from CanJS, this is very foreign. To most people, this is very foreign and unusual, and it's hard to explain in large doses. I don't know if anyone's ever gotten into functional programming really heavily, but when people start throwing a lot of keywords around, it can get confusing fast. So I just wanted to take the time to do a small presentation about Raj. Let me do that. All right. So can everyone see my screen then?
You're good.
Yep.
All right. So yeah, this is the best JavaScript framework that I have made. That's how you should read that. So the motivation for Raj as a framework is basically when I write my code, my highest priority besides delivering business value and making money is having code that's testable. And testability is, I put it above correctness and I put it above performance, because correctness, I mean, you guys have seen the code I write. If it's a bug, I will spin it and make it a feature. So correctness changes, you know, as your definition for a product changes. Performance, you know, you should benchmark everything before you spend time optimizing. But testability is something you always want to get right, because it makes changing when code inevitably does change a lot easier to manage. So I think it's the most important thing a framework should provide people as far as setting good patterns that should be followed. And Raj is, at its heart, focused on testability. So I tried to break down what exactly testability means to me, because testability, I think it's worth noting that testability doesn't mean you have a lot of tests. Testability is more about the ease at which you can test and how correct your test can be, and doing testing in a right way kind of involves what I think are the most important ones I've listed here, that any states and state changes that your program can enter are represented with data. So in JavaScript's case, it would usually be, very simple objects, JSON, that you could just say, what does my application look like at this point in time? And you should be able to write in JSON the state of your current runtime. Function should be referentially transparent. Basically, what you put in, you get the same output every time. Those are really useful because you can just rely on them. It's very easy to unit test, straightforward. I know we run into trouble with, I think it was Kevin that ran into trouble with actual JavaScript rejexes this week, how they maintain a global state. And there problems ensued there for him, but if rejexes were referentially transparent, you wouldn't have that problem. And the other thing is side effects produce state changes. So side effects being I/O. So anything really asynchronous should produce a state change that you can actually look at. So you can kind of think of it as a side effect would produce, like if a side effect was a request to a server, a state change would be like received payload or received list of cats or whatever, but it would be described as an object in JSON, so you can actually reproduce that state change without having to trigger that side effect. And finally, concerns should be well separated. This is kind of, it's probably the most vague one here, because what is a concern to someone else might be the same concern as something someone else is working on. But generally, just keeping things divided, I tend to think in terms of, okay, we have our data, we have our network layer, we have our HTML, our view layer, and I try and keep things separated along those lines. So that's enough explaining what I think is important. So Raj is a framework that kind of brings this all together in the best way I know how to do. Raj has been definitely an experiment for me. Probably over 2 months of researching, what's the best way to do this? I've gone all over the spectrum looking at different ideas, trying to steal a lot of good ideas from other languages and bringing them back into JavaScript in a way that makes sense. So this is Raj. Raj is just a runtime and utilities. So it took me 2 months, but I finally wrote these 19 lines of code that articulate basically a running program that has all of the testability concerns addressed. So there's maybe a lot going on here, maybe not, but I'll explain that in the next slide. That was just to show that it can easily fit in your head, this idea. The code isn't too large explaining what's happening. So this is basically what the Raj runtime is. You have an init function. It provides an initial state, an initial effect. And that effect, if it exists, then it's run. It's given a dispatch method that it can call, and it'll send messages to the runtime. Anytime the runtime receives a message, it'll call the update function, which will send the message and the old state, and you'll return the new state and the next effect. And whenever the state changes, the view function is called. So the view will be updated every time the state changes, and it can also dispatch a message, just like any effect. And it's probably important to note that the view, if you just look at what the arrows are doing, the view is in effect, essentially. The only difference is that the view is a little bit more privileged in it, that it gets full access to the state when you're using that function as opposed to an effect. So yeah, that's really what Raj is. The important thing to note is all of these methods, except for this one, all of these are synchronous. So you're able to inspect your data at any time and just look at it. The effects are only communicate with the Raj runtime, so there's no leaking from here or there. There's a well-separated boundary of concern. So you can't really do too much to screw these up through effects. So there's a lot of separation in place to make sure you can't go too wild. So I can do a quick demo. I think since I've just heard like nothing from people, I'll open it up to questions first before I get into the code. So are there any questions?
No, I think with most things, you want to see an example before you can really process it.
All right. I just wanted a break because I was like talking too much, and I always worry that I'm just rambling. It's a good thing there's not a lot of people here to judge me right now. All right, so I'll do the demo. So just to piece everything together, I'm just gonna freehand a simple counter component. I know it's kind of a trivial thing, but just to show how you would build something like that in Raj. So Raj always follows the same basic steps. Oh, dang, I gotta save this as a JS file where it's gonna look. There you go. So Raj, you always start out with well, I'll just make comments first. So Raj, you start out with your init function. Heck. So you always start out with your init function. Oh my gosh, if this keeps happening, it can't work like this.
Live demos.
Yeah, I mean, something is going wrong internally, I guess. I don't know why. Just creating a file in Atom.
Maybe just reopen the file and it said it won't come back anymore. So maybe if that's possible.
Maybe if I can just, can I open it? Close that then.
What a terrible warning message. It's like reopen and this won't come up anymore, and that's all
Yeah.
it's telling you.
Well, let's go to an Elite editor.
Or
That's much superior. Let's make a new file here and see how this goes.
nice.
Oh, perfect. So that's good. Let me just open VS Code in a better place, I guess. So what is that code? Is that?
Yeah, just code.
Yeah, because there's only one code, and they have the right to claim that. Foo.js. All right, sorry. Gonna bump up the font size. Can I hide this? There.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Okay. Sorry. So we always start out with the same things. An init function, which describes your initial state and your initial effect. For a counter, that initial state is just 0, and we don't have an effect, so we don't need it. That would be good if you were, say, transitioning to a page and you wanted to load data about a user immediately. This is where you would put that effect. The next step for me, and this is kind of where Raj helps out on the utility side of things, is there is a little utility called message, and basically this is kind of where I feel like most people would get confused with language, but this is just basically creating new types that describe our state changes. So with a counter, you really only have two states. You have increment and you have decrement. So all message is doing is just creating one of those new types. So this is part of the process. The next step is always to consolidate your state changes into something that you can pattern match on. You don't have to do this with the runtime, but I think it's a very good pattern. So I always just define a message. And this is a union of both of those, increment and decrement. So that kind of nicely describes what type of state changes will be occurring as this component is running. So all of those cases will be handled in our update. So we get our message, whatever it happens to be, and we get, some people call it model, some people call it state. State's probably better for JavaScript. So what we're basically going to say is message match. So this is basic pattern matching. I tried to make the syntax for this as nice as possible. So you can just do increment, and then I'm going to say state +1, increment, state -1. So I'm returning that. And I got to wrap this in this because you can return an effect if you wanted to. So does this make sense to everybody so far? Basically, my update function encapsulates all of the state changes that can occur. It takes the existing state and does something to it and just returns the new state to everyone.
If you try to do something that wasn't defined, would it just tell you can't do it or throw an error?
Yeah, it would throw an error. And if you couldn't anticipate all of these messages, you can do just a final, like, wildcard.
Like a catch-all, yeah.
Yeah, catch-all. Otherwise, yeah, it will throw an error. And you can actually give these like nice names. Like this would be like counter message and like counter increment. And when it blew up, it would tell you the exact name. Like these are display names for these types. So you can make it as pretty as you want to. Okay, so step 1, init. Step 2, define your state changes. Step 3, define your update function. Step 4 is just writing your view. So your view receives the state, and it gets a dispatch. Dispatch is just a function which will take a single argument and pass it to your update. As far as you're concerned, that's what's happening. Because it will dispatch asynchronously. But as far as your code looks, dispatch is just a simple function. So for this demo, I'm gonna use React. You don't have to use React. I just chose React because it kind of fit the model best for this type of thing. So I'm gonna do my view using the JSX. Hopefully my editor doesn't blow up on that. So I've got, well, that's not a good one. Got my state, which is going to be the count. And then I have my button. And when it's clicked, I'm going to dispatch increment message. And it's inc. So I'm going to do the same thing, but for decrement. Okay. So that's my view. And then finally, the last step is to usually tie all of these things together. So this is where I'm going to use something from Raj again. We have program, which is Raj's special thing for React. Oh, dang, I do that all the time. Special thing for React, which basically takes your init, update, and view and composes them all together into a React component. Wait, I need to do this. Be very careful. So init, update, view. And so I'm not going to run this component because currently Raj does not work if you just opened it. Actually, you know what? This is a good thing for Steel. If I wanted to try to... What folder am I in? Can I get that folder thing back? The... Yeah, I got Steel.
Just click on the folder up top. Yep.
All right. So I got Steel because I'm already working in this thing. Got it going. So yeah, I'm gonna do that then. So I need, what do I need? I need Raj and I need React to work. But I need the JSX, and I don't think Steel would support. No one supports that by default, unless they're using a Babel that does.
JSX by default.
It might. I don't know if Steel uses the one that supports it by default, though. Let's find out. So I'm going to go to localhost, and I'm going to start that.
Did you save those in your as dev dependencies or as dependencies?
Does that automatically now?
Yeah, I did, but I used an alias. Okay, so it's saying, hold on, I got to move this. Okay, so did I save it? I should have saved it. No, this is the old one. I need the good one. Where'd it go? There it is. Why didn't it save? No.
It looked like it was there in your package, Jason, right?
Yeah. Well, now it is. Oh, yeah. Was it already? Why wasn't it loading?
It was in dev dependencies, for sure.
All right, dang it. Too many steps. Bam.
If you have trouble getting it working, I would say that I don't need to see it working.
Yeah.
Like to have thoughts on it. Like I can assume that it will work at some point.
Yeah, I mean it works. Like I've used this to make some apps. So.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I believe that it works.
Yeah.
How does the state, like, does the state normally represent the state for the whole app? Like it would have like state.counter and state.firstname and state.something, like.
Wait, sorry?
Where you're adding one and subtracting one from the state.
Mm-hmm.
Like, does it just coerce that into a number? Like, I thought state in that function represented like a full app state that might have a bunch of sub values.
No, it doesn't have to. So the initial state is just the 0 for this particular component. So
okay. But that init could have a much more complex.
Yeah, it could be anything. I just picked the most minimal state to represent a counter. Because I don't want to get into it today, but when you compose these things, basically, if you wanted to represent a list of counters, it would just be, a list of that, and that would be your, like, each of these could be a counter state if you wanted to think about it in the most minimal sense.
Okay, cool.
So Yeah, so a state can be as complex as you want it to be. Through composition, you really don't have to think about it too much from the perspective of writing a component, because what will happen basically is the parent will say, okay, so I've determined this message belongs to this certain counter, which you can do pretty easily with message types. It'll determine that, and then the parent update will just call, it'll just do what it needs to do to return like the counter update, passing it whatever state that it needed. So as far as when you write components, when I say that you do this the same way every time, it's because the parent will wire you up into them, and they'll know best how to make that decision. And they'll just call these functions.
So, do you have an example somewhere that shows kind of a full app and how you compose components? Because it reminds me a lot of Elm. I mean, it's kind of structured similarly. And the problem that I've always had with Elm is like you still have that one global app state that has to compose the states of all of your different components.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if there's an example, I'd love to take a look at that. You don't have to show it now, obviously. But.
Yeah, to modify maybe slightly what Kevin said. To me, it's not so much like it's not the fact that it's composing, it's how it composes that I tend to have a problem with. And we've talked about this already, Chris. I don't mind. I mean, a parent component to know all about its children, that's like, it's got to know that anyways, right? It's whether it's like how much logic starts. Like I like that this increment and decrement is here. The behavior when these events happen, is here. And if it was like, the logic for like making an Ajax request and what I want to do is have. So I guess I have. Not testability isn't the biggest concern for me on applications. It's like just under like modularity. Like what I really like is being able to say like I have all of these like little tiny pieces, and if I want to throw one of them out, like I can. It's almost like its own little part that is easily thrown away and replaced by something else, something better. That's what's really nice for me. So if I'm like building, we talked about this in training, if I'm building the player profile page, I like to like have that kind of its area like and kind of self-contained without the rest of the app having to know about all of that. Not necessarily not having to know about it. It can like load it and kind of compose it into the bigger app. But the logic for like when player is clicked on or something and we need to change the state, like all of that can kind of, the logic for that can kind of stay in the player page because that's what it's associated with. So yeah, I have to get going soon. So there's not time to, at least for me, to see you write out a bigger example or something like that. But that is exactly what I would like to see, is just how you've got this counter and I can see how it is managing its own state. Now, how does that get composed up into into a bigger app with another counter-like thing on the side of it? And to me, composition isn't, you have to deal with that no matter what. It's how much intrinsic knowledge does the composer have to have of its children. And if it doesn't have to have very much, then I like that. Because then children are just kind of like these things, and you're just doing the bare minimum to like link them up.
Yeah. And like I've said before, I think this pattern suits that well. But yeah, I'll definitely talk about that in another presentation. The reason I held off on talking about that is this is kind of a lot to kind of think about all at once.
Do you get any performance? I just, the message.match, is that using hashing, or is that doing like a loop? And have you done any? I mean, I could see that is a, could potentially be a performance issue. I don't know if you've made it work.
I haven't, but there's no reason it couldn't just be a table underneath.
Do you have inheritance? Is it possible like you have, I mean, I don't know if that even fits your model in general, but is it possible like you could inherit from increment and then you could like have, well, if it's this special type of increment, we want to do this, but if it's like the general, any type of increment, or does that not even fit with like?
No, not really. What you would do instead, if I can get it working, you would just have, like, what would it be? Like value increment, or increment value probably. That would be a message. Then you would have increment once. That would be a message.
Yeah.
And then you just do another union of those, and then you could pattern match inside of this.
Mm-hmm.
You can just keep pattern matching based on
inside of inside. Yeah. I mean.
Yeah, you could just do increment dot match.
You just put the union, and then it would, like, if you did another union of those, and then just to put that, is the message union a type of message? No, is it a different type of thing? Like MSG there, which takes
this one.
But yeah, that can you just put that on line like 22 and then it would match whether it's increment or decrement?
No.
Do stuff like that. Okay.
Yeah, you
break your conceptual like how this stuff should work, or would that kind of stuff like be theoretically possible to say like, well, sometimes it's like these 5 different things can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And what I want to do is say like, well, here's what should happen if any of those 5 should happen. Now, again, I'm mostly just talking about reducing boilerplate to just be able to say like, well, if you find situations in apps all the time where it's like, well, if to do is created, updated, or destroyed, I want a little spinner icon to show up. So I want an easy way to match like collections of messages and run this thing.
Yeah. So again, like if what you're saying when you want a spinner to show is really you want something in your model that just says is loading. Right.
Yeah, but I want to set that to be. I guess this is another difference that I think that we like. I try to like have my is loading. What happens for is loading as like all in one place. And I know that like what you might be jumping the gun and assuming what you're going to say is like, well, then let's just say is loading. We wanted that to show when either increment or decrement happens in this application. And you might say, well, then just make the increment callback function inside update, just set is loading to true, and then decrement sets is loading to true. But the way that I would want to write it is instead to have like, here's kind of like what should happen when either increment around the is loading. I would say when either increment or decrement happens, is loading should now be true. I would take the rest of the state and just change is loading. That way I can kind of see is loading in one place. Mm-hmm. I guess what I'm saying is like, if you want to make this so that it's like, adaptable for those kind of personal preferences, if you think they are personal, or like I like things that way, then that might be a suggestion to seek out like, is it possible to the more that parts of your state you can kind of clearly say like this is the logic for it. I don't know, I'm a really big fan of that.
Yeah, and can your state be a class or whatever, an instance of a class? Or does it just have to be an object?
No, your state can be anything. Yeah, Raj doesn't really enforce anything about what your state value is, whatever it means to you.
So in theory, your state could change outside of your update function.
Yeah, I can't prevent people from just doing bad things. Yeah.
Well, yeah, to get what Justin wants, it's not really a bad you know, if that is
Well,
loading
I mean,
with
yeah, I know.
deriving from other parts of the state.
Yeah, and we've talked about that a lot. I just think, so like I said, testability is the most important thing to me. To be able to just take this update, I mean, that's kind of what I wanted to like end this demonstration on, is like just looking at what we actually have here. This just returns JSON. You can easily do just a deep equal check to make sure that matches up with what you think it is. Update, you're just passing one of these messages and you're getting a new state back. You can test that with a deep equals, or in this case, just an equals. Everything is really simple, and the problem with having dependent, like data-driven dependencies like that is you lose the ability to look at a state and just create a new one on the fly, because there's just, that is loading. If it's deriving from incoming messages, you can't really say, here's a state, here's a new state, because it needs to be looking at the previous messages on its own.
Wait,
Right.
So it's got like it. It's got like
I don't understand why, like, why update wouldn't. All I'm doing is restructuring update to, well, there would be are these so message can be of only one type, right? So like you can't have
message can be anything. You can send anything through dispatch.
No, sorry, what I mean is message match is only going to run one of these callbacks. They can't run like multiple, because a message can't be increment and decrement at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess what I'm proposing is not necessarily. So this is an interesting. To me, it's not really changing the testability, because the output of your update would, you would still test it the same way. There would be a message that would come in, and there would be an initial state, and there would be a new state at the end of it. With what I'm saying, the only difference is like match. I'm proposing like another form of match that allows you to like match and call back multiple of these, but like the state that they return would kind of multiple of these kind of matched messages could be run. They would each like pass through the state to the next one, so that, you know, if you had an increment, I'm just saying, proposing there was like your state was an array with one item was like had a count and it is loading.
Mm-hmm.
It would run the increment, decrement callback functions, but also run the like increment or decrement callback function, and it would pass them all through to each other, so that increment would take whatever the state is right now, increment it. Let's say an increment message came in. Then the increment would first be matched. It would increment the state and return a brand new state that had the state, the count incremented, but then also the increment or decrement kind of case would be hit. And that would take whatever increments callback return, but then it would change is loading to true. And that way, you know, that way like you can kind of have update would still be tested, like the exact same inputs and outputs to update. The only difference is loading, the logic for that would be in one place, if that makes sense. It'd be like a
That? Wait, is that the logic that you mean?
no. Here, let me. Can you paste this file real quick in like Slack for me, and then I'll write up what I meant.
Yeah. Dang. All right.
So while he's doing that, and I had a question. So message that match is returning back a new state, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So your state really couldn't be. Well, how does it? Maybe we can talk about this later. I wonder if you used like an instance of a class in your init function, how would it create a new state?
What do you mean? Like, how would you create a new class and update?
How does message that match do that?
I mean, well, I guess if you were using a class in a certain way, you could just, you know, like, just say like state dot set, I don't know, set loading true, and then you can just return state. Like, it doesn't have to be an absolute new value.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, these things are really flexible to what you can do. Like, so Raj includes this message, but I only included that so I could work faster. There are a lot of what these are tagged unions. So this isn't really like a core feature of Raj. So yeah, you could really use anything for your message. You can dispatch anything. It doesn't really matter to the runtime. These are just nice ways to encapsulate state changes. And you're right, Kevin. This is basically Elm, but in JavaScript. The only difference I would say that there is, besides it being JavaScript and less type safe, is the way that we handle side effects is different. Elm has the concept of subscriptions where, like, you need to introduce like an effect handler and like all of this other stuff to manage a list of subscriptions. Like if you were connecting to a server or a WebSocket connection, you would have to register a subscription with an effect handler, and that effect handler would update and automatically close things when you were done with them. It was so complicated and not the JavaScript way that I'd left that out for now.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of what's tripping me up is I'm trying to draw too much of a parallel to Elm, because like Elm's update is always going to return like a new data structure, right, or a new model.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt this because I have to go because Matthew's leaving in like 30 minutes. But just to show what I meant, and then I got to get going. What I meant is something like this update 2, where it would match and run multiple of these functions, but presumably each one would have to have like, you know, state would have to be dealt with somehow to like get this old state and then somehow call the function again. I don't really know, but the idea is that like if an increment came in, well, it would do around count what count should be doing, and then you could also match when either increment or decrement happens, and then do around loading. So it's update. You know, if you're testing update, the results would be the same always. Just it's a little bit different in how it treats like different properties. It allows you to say like, I want logic around is loading essentially, or I want is logic around count.
Yeah, and Justin, looking at that, I'd say that's perfectly fine. There's no problem that I see with that at all. The only reason it's not in Raj, like I had that thought up as like a multi-match type thing.
Yeah.
The only reason that's not in there is just because I didn't want to add any new stuff to the core, because I do think, you know, these utilities can be written on top of Raj, and I just wanted to keep things really small. Nothing there I disagree with. From what I understand is going on, I'd probably write it a little bit differently, where you'd still have your regular match. Like you'd still have your regular match, and then you can just do like a composition.
Yeah.
Where you,
I unfortunately I have to go. I have a hard out right now. So
all right.
And we hit our hour.
Cool.
But good stuff, Chris. We definitely need to talk about it again once like Matthew, Chase, and everybody, all the other contributors are here. But thanks everybody for coming. I got to end this show right now.